Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to begin the service. Please make your way to your seats. Just be careful of the iPad in the middle of the room. Thank you all for coming. We had about 80 people or 80 devices signed on, so in addition to everyone here, there's well over 100 additional people joining us today. I believe that we're going to start with the cutting of Kriya. The service will be conducted by Rabbi Jeffrey Weil and Rabbi Sidney Helmer.
Adonai, ma Adam v'teva ehu, ben enosh v'tifashvehu, Adam v'hematama, v'ma p'tzel over v'boki atzitz v'chalach v'erev v'moel v'yiresh. Tashet enosh Adam v'tomer, shuvu b'nei Adam. These are the words of the psalmist saying, Adonai, eternal God, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you would even be mindful of us? We are all of us but a breath, our days a passing shadow. We come and go like grass, which in the morning it shoots up and is renewed, and in the evening of the day, the evening of all of our lives, it fades and withers. But God can cause all of us to return unto dust, saying, Shuvu b'nei Adam, return, O mortal ones. Would that we were wise. Would that we understood whither we go from here, for when we die we carry nothing with us, not our riches, not our glory. But God, you say, Shmor Tam or Yashar, mark the wholehearted, behold the upright. Those are the ones who shall find shalom, who shall find peace. Friends, we gather this afternoon to remember one who was wholehearted and upright, loving, strong, and kind, Tamar Weissberg. You'll find the 23rd Psalm in our handouts in the inside panel. We'll read it together after I recite it in Hebrew. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, v'no desha yoviteni, Amen. The coaching on the lady Nafshi Shubedu. Yankeni b'magle tzedek l'man shmo. Gam ki elef v'gei samavet lo yura yitani b'di. Shiftechan v'shetecha temai nachumuni. Ta'rov t'panai shulchan neged tzorai. Tishanta v'shem roshi kosi b'vaya. Ach tov v'chesed t'funi kol yimei chaya. Tishati b'beit Adonai v'orech yamin. Together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. It is my honor to call forward Rabbi Sidney Hellbrown of Temple Bethel.
To take one moment to share my appreciation to Rabbi Weil for welcoming me into his congregation here, which has become over the years the home place, the home site for worship for Rabbi and Tamar Weissberg over these last many years. And I know that this place feels this is a holy space for him and his family. And so I'm grateful to be able to share this pulpit on this day with you. Esa enai el ha'arim. Me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai. Osei shamayim ha'aretz. I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul, your going and coming, now and forever. When I arrived at Temple Bethel, Tamar Weissberg was our educator and had been for many, many, many years. And I had the opportunity to see her presence working and loving the children in our community. She was strong, she was firm, she was strict, and she was loving and giving and caring to each individual child. She was an equal partner, not with me, but with her husband, with Rabbi Weisberg, who just affords, and she was his equal in every way. And it was an honor to have her leading our community and our congregation. She was, and will all ever be remembered as a woman of valor. Eshet Kyle Ni Yin Sa. A woman of valor who can find. She is more precious than fine pearls. Her husband trusts in her, and so he lacks nothing. She does him good, never harm, all the days of her life. She perceives that her labor is rewarded. Her candle burns on into the night. She reaches out to those in need and extends her hands to the poor. She is clothed in strength and dignity and she faces the future cheerfully. She speaks with wisdom. The law of kindness is on her lips. Her children rise up and bless her. Her husband sings her praises. Many daughters have done valiantly, but you excel them all.
Thank you, Rabbi Hellbrown. The familiar words of the third chapter of Kohelet or Ecclesiastes present this idea, which is sometimes difficult for us to accept, really, that everything is unfolding in life the way it ought to, or at least at an appropriate time. And certainly there are times in all of our lives where we question that, and how can that really possibly be? Is that meant to happen? Is there a time for that as well? But the author of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, by tradition, King Solomon, nudges us, guides us in that direction, that things are happening somehow, maybe beyond our capacity to understand it, in a way that it ought to. For everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot that which is planted, a time to tear down, a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve, a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time when we must refrain from our embraces, a time to seek, a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time for silence and a time to speak. And so this is an appropriate time to speak words in tribute of Tamar Weissberg, and it is my honor to first call forward Ariel Weisberg. And here another one.
Topic. The topic of Tamar Weisberg is encyclopedic. But if I talk too long, she's going to get up and walk out. Okay, as my mother liked to say, Kadima. Sadiq katamar ifrach. The righteous shall flourish like a palm tree. Psalms chapter 92. What's in a name? Tamar, a palm. And like a palm, Tamar cast a giant, benevolent shadow. Her children and her students flourish under her guidance and inspiration. A tree cares for itself and greatly contributes to the environment because of its nurturing presence. Tamar was a stalwart. She enriched all who knew her with her joy of life, enthusiasm, love of learning, kindness, generosity, and the courage of her convictions. A tree reaches upward, and so does its branches. Tamar taught all of us, as a shining example, to aim for the highest, that achievement and success personally, as a member of a dynamic, loving family, and as a Jew, were paramount goals. But in reaching upward, Ima taught these important lessons like a beautiful symphony, with sound ethical guidance, and in harmony with being an American, being Jewish, and most important, being a good person. Tamar's stock in trade as a teacher, mother, wife, and friend was doing the right thing with grace, kindness, and generosity of spirit and material needs. Like a tree, Tamar shared all of her fruits with all of her spiritual constituencies, especially those with a thirst for knowledge, a love for Israel, and for those that wanted to pursue the high ideals of Judaism. What's in a name? Tamar was a sour, thick and thorny on the outside, but richly sweet and delicious on the inside. In 1932, Tamar was born as the youngest of 4 children to Michael and Leah Lebowski in pre-state Palestine. The Lebowskis have a storied history as pioneers in the political struggle for statehood. The Lebowski story in The Miracle of Israel is a story of guts and determination. First, a little history. Labor Zionists, unlike the political Zionists, did not believe that a Jewish state could be created simply by appealing to the international community or to powerful nations like then Britain, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire. Rather, labor Zionists believed that a Jewish state could only be created through the hands-on efforts of the working class, settling in the land of Israel and constructing a state through the creation of a labor Jewish society with rural kibbutzim and moshavim and urban Jewish proletariat. With the crushing oppression of Tsarist Russia and the too frequent mayhem of pogroms, in 1910, Michael Lebowski stowed away on the Ginosar, a ship leaving Odessa, to put into reality his fervent labor Zionist beliefs. This courageous, idealistic, and bold, decisive move was what defined the Lebowski. Kadima. Michael was a gentle, learned man whose quiet demeanor belied the fire in his belly. Arriving in Palestine in 1910, he settled at Kibbutz Kinneret and joined the Hashomrim, the precursor to the Haganah, to protect the Jewish settlements from Arab violence. He never talked about it, but we knew the man was a soldier. Later, during World War I, Michael joined the famed Jewish spy network, Neely, where he spied for the British against the Ottoman Turks. In this storied endeavor, Michael was caught in a crossfire between the British and Ottoman forces, was wounded and taken to the hospital. There, he met a beautiful, like-minded nurse, Leah, who he married. Together, they worked to build a land, Hembonu et Haaretz. It was this selfless commitment to the state of Israel that infused Tamar with her lioness-like protective nature, willing to sacrifice for the good of the family and for her ironclad ideals of Israel at all costs. Family with a capital F and Zionism with a capital Z. Growing up poor, with parents deeply depressed over the death of Moshe at 16, did not dampen the family's commitment to education, family, and to the Kehillah. Generosity and charity were prime attitudes. Although quite poor financially, every Friday, Saptilea would take Tamar to hand out clothes to the poor in Tel Aviv, rich in spirit. Tamar was a very good student, excelling, of course, at Hebrew, Tanakh, and history. Not so surprisingly, though, knowing her interesting attitudes about Arabs, Tamar flunked Arabic. Tamar's fervent ideals and attitudes were hardened by living through the extreme deprivations of the siege of Jerusalem from November 1947 to July 1948. Tamar and her sister Batami lived in Jerusalem, taking care of their disabled brother Ephraim, who left Tel Aviv and their parents to shepherd Ephraim through the first medical school at Hebrew University. Surrounded by hostile Arab forces, they endured endless shelling with mattresses blocking windows and no food. They were forced to eat grass and worse, to survive starvation. Saba Michael was in the first convoy to break through the siege, bringing tomatoes and other food. Tamar, characteristically, shared this food with everyone in their apartment building, including Haile Selassie, the Emperor of Ethiopia, who lived in exile in the same building with Ephraim, Batami, and Tamar. Okay, enough of the deep background. I was allotted 7 minutes, including time for crying. Kadim. What's in a name? Tamar Weissberg. Wife, partner, teacher, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. I will leave to Rabbi Wild the wife and partner discussion, but I would be remiss if I didn't treat, albeit briefly, Tamar as wife and partner. This Saber came to America in 1952 with limited English skills, without family or friends, a true stranger in a strange land, with a bucking bronco of a husband named Victor Weissberg. Victor, the World War II vet, an only child, with an overbearing mother, was a really smart rabbinical student. People took to Tamar at HUC, later at Temple Isaiah Israel, and at Bethel, when together Abba and Ima found their spiritual home. Tamar was beautiful, very pleasant, fun, generous, a great listener, and extremely interesting. Bringing her Saber bona fides, she brought with her the whole Israel struggle and her sense of sacrifice to America, and particularly to Bethel, where together my father and mother, as lifelong partners, brought the spirit and ideals of Israel and Zionism to Abba's far-flung work for Jewry and Israel. She hated being called a Rebbe. But the truth be told, she was the constant Rebbe. Interestingly, growing up in Israel, where no self-respecting Israeli was reformed, except for a few Yekkes. That's German Jews, by the way. Posting to a reformed shul in Chicago was eye-opening. But Ima won everyone over with her tangibles and intangibles. Tamar was not afraid to break protocols as a Rebbe. She did not know what was proper in a reformed synagogue, but she knew what was proper in a Jewish place. She was the first to wear slacks at Shabbat services. In a famous story, she boldly stood up at a sisterhood meeting and legislated that the first Seder of Pesach was for the family. And in a flip of years of tradition at a synagogue, organized in 1871, it was the second night that would be the Temple Seder. Bethel became the first synagogue in Chicago that was decidedly and outspokenly Zionist. This did not change until the 1967 Seven-Day War. When the 1967 Six-Day War. Thank you. Six-Day War. Thank you. Galvanized the Jewish community, with almost all synagogues adopting Zionism as a key element. Tamar was a lady in all senses of the word. Her tough, lioness exterior was always tempered by her kindness, generosity, respectfulness, enthusiasm, love of everything Jewish, devotion to the cause, and the ability to articulate clearly why being more Jewish and more Zionistic was as important as breathing air. Together as partners, my father and mother, with undying spirit, propelled Bethel into a thriving 875 family synagogue, where young and old, often 7 days a week, came together for spiritual and educational enrichment. They were the dynamic duo. Under their watch, Bethel was electric, with an active religious school, youth group, men's club, sisterhood, adult education, outreach to Israel, services, etc., etc., etc. What's in a word? The Weissberg family. Here I get to take some lessons. Remember, Ima was a cop. No, really, she was a cop. She served in the Israeli police at the Jerusalem headquarters. Please expand on that imagery. But she never had to use the third degree to exact confessions, because she had Alona as her spy. And Amira was always blurting out cringeworthy secrets. After laying down the law with Abba, Tamar ran the house and Abba ran the temple. Ima had rules. She was firm, but often fun in enforcing these rules. For example, Abba had to come home for dinner every night, and then he could return to the synagogue to meet its demands. There was no TV except on weekends. I still think I would be a better person if I had watched The Monkees, The Munsters, and Father Knows Best. As kids, we could not partake in any activities on Friday nights unless it was a Jewish activity. I could not convince Ima that Friday night football games was a Jewish activity. Abba was not allowed in Ima's kitchen. For the record, that rule was strictly enforced since 1962, when Abba failed miserably with his egg foo young dinner. We were all better off for the strict enforcement of this no-fly zone, or should I say, no-fry zone. Ima was a tremendous and prodigious cook, until 2008, when she could no longer carry it off. Shabbat dinners were an amazing array of soups, salads, 2 main dishes, 5 side dishes, and dessert, with all but the dessert created only by Ima without help or consultation. Every Shabbat, with the whole extended family in attendance, we had a veritable sumptuous feast where everyone felt Ima made their favorite dish, just for them. Long story that I will leave to others, Ima was not a baker. If you were fortunate to attend Shabbat at our house as a guest, and there were many because of Ima and Abba's generous natures, you were enriched by the food and the no-holds-barred discussion, where after the pears and zmirot, a lot was said. Was it always specific? Heck no. But it was fun and spirited in all senses of the word. Ema had rules on finances too. Ema took the checkbook away from Abba because his math skills were wanting. Abba liked to round up or round down, shunning accuracy for result orientation. For Ema, everything had to be accounted for to the penny, and she legislated that we lived on Abba's salary, but banked and invested his honorarium. Ema's favorite saying was, "I learned from all my teachers." Employing this reasoning, Ema was a sponge in absorbing lessons from loyal, caring congregants that taught her investing. With this advice, and together with her self-education and discipline, Tamar, as CFO, grew Weissberg, Inc. But despite this discipline, Ema was not a spendthrift. She enjoyed beautiful things like china, crystal, and Jewish art. She enjoyed culture and imbued the family in acculturated activities like theater, symphony, opera, yearly visits to Stanford, Canada for Shakespeare, and sadly no hockey. Ema was very charitable, giving money to Jewish causes, including the Federation, who actually published donations, and other Jewish causes like to protect our heritage, the art, and other appreciative beneficiaries, including quiet, full-handed gifts to the needy and hungry in our immediate community. One final Ema rule. You needed to achieve as a student. In particular, as a person in general, particularly as a person and in general. We as her kids and her students had to aim high and succeed admirably, not just with the requisite high degrees and professional achievements, but as spouses, parents, and members of the Jewish community. And it was not just do as I say. She taught and pushed us through shining examples. For instance, she attended college to get her undergraduate degree in 1971 at Bundle, with a major in education, graduating magna cum laude, accompanied by several undereducated congregate moms who Ema convinced to join in her journey. In the 80s, my father enlisted Ema to be the director of education at Bethel, leading to a true partnership between Ema and Abba for the next 15 years. Time limits this super rich time, but suffices to say that Ema was all in as a teacher and administrator, bringing her sober lioness self with the uncanny ability to use her warmth, enthusiasm, nurturing, encouraging attributes to the labors of love. The students and teachers adored her. The parents feared her. Tamar really made her mark as a friend and role model. In Tamar's school, you learn Hebrew, for real. Holidays were celebrated with creativity. Israel was the central topic of Jewish history. And your bar mitzvah was definitely not a hard stop to your Jewish education. She made sure her students could go to Jewish camps and visit Israel. In short, with pizzazz, she made sure you felt at home being Jewish, that you were proud to be Jewish and stayed connected to Israel. In this endeavor, she worked tirelessly, shoulder to shoulder with Abba. To conclude, I would be remiss if I did not express, on behalf of my family, thanks and appreciation to a few very special friends. First, we thank the Bethel community for their support and friendship. Less is not more here. But in short, Bethel is and will always be the proverbial defining moment. Second, we thank Ezra Habonim, Niles Township. The family loves this congregation for its warmth, spirituality, and its superlative Jewish experience. Thank you for making us feel welcome in this second home. Third, to Ima's caregivers, who truly do the Lord's work. Michelle Mendoza, Donna Williams, and Zahara Mamdu. You guys are absolutely amazing in what you do and how each of you cared for Ima and I with such endless vigilance, love, and devotion, all the way through to the peaceful, beautiful end. The Gemara teaches us that a Jew who passes on Friday goes straight to Gan Eden, and that passing on Rosh Chodesh Adar, when we celebrate Simchat Hayim, is further elevated. Ima, you hit the light. As we are taught, the Lord counts the days of the righteous, and in this case of Tamar Weissberg, the Lord, in his infinite wisdom, rounded up.
So much. Lord Henry, grandson.
There is no one like our Safta. As Ariel shared, after growing up in Israel and having lived through the Israeli War of Independence, including the siege of Jerusalem when she and her family nearly starved, at the age of 19, my grandmother took a huge risk, marrying an American she had known for just a few weeks, and leaving her family and homeland for the United States. For me, and for her other grandchildren, it is what she and my grandfather built together for which my Safta will be remembered. My grandfather, Rabbi Victor Weissberg, is impressive in his own right and has always been the public face of the family. But we all know who's truly running the show. Among other things, Safta ruled the house. She also managed the family's finances, saving and carefully investing what little money my grandparents originally had. She was also the one person who could keep my grandfather in line with his simple, "God damn it, Victor!" But I venture to say that my Safta's greatest accomplishment was my family. Initially, with no family nearby, she built her own, living to see the arrival of 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 10 great-grandchildren, on whose behalf I'm speaking. So myself, Talia, Ilan, Orly, Danielle, Micah, Ronit, and Esther, and our children, Jaden, Gideon, Margalit, Jonah, Jonathan, Aaron, Miriam, Lior, Maya, and Levi. My grandparents had originally planned to move back to Israel once their children were grown, and I'm so thankful they scrapped those plans once I, and later the rest of my cousins, came into the picture. Both of my grandparents, but especially my grandmother, were so present in all our lives while we were growing up. As a kid, I was fortunate to see my grandparents at least once, if not multiple times, every week. Without a doubt, as Ariel also talked about, the highlight of the week was Shabbat. And every single week we had dinner at my grandparents' house. Despite her job as the education director of our synagogue and other demands on my grandmother's time, including a weekly hair appointment so that she always looked perfectly put together along with her St. John suits, my grandmother cooked a multi-course feast for the entire family every week. She started cooking days ahead and even accepted requests from her grandchildren, serving a rotating repertoire of delectable dishes that range from Jewish staples like corned beef, still the best that I've ever had, and I think my cousins would agree, to Thai-inspired peanut noodles and Stouffer's macaroni and cheese, which somehow, when prepared by my grandmother, never tasted like frozen food and were always perfectly browned on top. But the food was beside the point. The best part of Shabbat was spending time with my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. We would hang out for hours, talking, playing games. All the grandchildren piled on my grandparents' bedroom. All of us piled on my grandparents' bed. Sometimes we would walk to Baskin Robbins for ice cream after dinner, and it was always so much fun. Holidays were even bigger and more raucous family affairs, and we were frequently joined by many of the people in the room today. Seeing my grandparents, though, wasn't limited to Shabbat. Their door was always open, literally, because they left it unlocked. And anytime we were anywhere in the vicinity, we stopped by, even for just a bit. I regularly dashed into the house, thrilled to be greeted by my Savta, coming out of the kitchen, classical music playing in the background, to give me a big hug and a kiss. Frequently, that was followed by challah smeared with some Nutella. Savta was so devoted to my cousins and me. As the first grandchildren and as the anointed prince, as our family likes to call me, growing up, I spent more time with my grandmother than anyone else besides my parents and sister. She came to my house and cared for me when I was sick. I loved trains, and we regularly took the L into the city to visit museums together, including just blocks away getting Skokie Swift. When I was interested in Native Americans, my grandfather took my sister Orly and me to Arizona to visit Native American reservations there. To celebrate my bar mitzvah, my grandparents took me and my cousins Ilan and Talia to Israel. And on my 16th birthday, it was my Savta who took me to the DMV to get my driver's license. The list goes on. No matter what she had going on, my grandmother always had or made time for me and her other grandchildren, and she made each of us feel special and loved. Savta showed up for anything and everything, whatever the event was, however important or significant, even my countless bit roles in school plays waving a flag for one song. I especially loved our lunch dates, usually at Maggiano's, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with other family members. There, Savta provided a listening ear and thoughtful advice, usually sharing a wise Hebrew saying or a long and seemingly pointless story that somehow always reached a spot-on conclusion. For all of us, even for me, the prince, Savta had very high standards. She encouraged us to strive for excellence, she celebrated our successes, and she offered guidance when we fell short. For me personally, she helped to instill love of learning, travel, Judaism, and Israel. Not to mention a taste for some of the finer things in life, like the Ferragamo shoes she always wore, and I wear in her honor. It's hard to believe that my Savta, as I remember her, was not herself for most of my adult life, and through countless graduations, weddings, births, and other family sequels. Nonetheless, she remained and remains a force in my life and in our family. I hope that she'd be proud of us and where we are today, of her life's work. I think she'd be proudest that our family remains strong and growing, and most important, that we're all very much in each other's lives. Even with my grandmother no longer with us, what she built and her values, chief among them family, community, and achievement, will live on in all of us as her legacy. We, and in particular her grandchildren, will carry the torch of that legacy as we share our memories of Savta and work to instill her values in our own children.
Thank you, Lauren, on behalf of grandchildren, great-grandchildren, thank you. And now, dear friend Elaine Kaufman.
My grandma, Pauline Brody, Shalom, from Radichin, which was in Russia when she left for the United States, used the expression Allah Malas, all the virtues, to describe someone who was wonderful. Grandma Brody would say that person had Allah Malas. Even though I have known Tamar Weissberg for over 60 years, wow, that's a long time. It is very difficult for me to do her justice. Maybe that's because she had Allah Malas. I will try to describe some of her virtues. Tamar was pretty, and she spoke fantastic Hebrew. After all, she was born in what was to become Israel. She was friendly, capable, and helpful. Tamar was beautiful. She was slender, had high cheekbones, and when she smiled, she showed off her deep dimples. My husband Ben and I have at home a photo of Tamar and Rabbi Weisberg at some Temple Bethel event. He's seated at the table, and she's standing behind him with her arms around his shoulders, giving him a hug, her dimples twinkling. It's a picture of true love, of a marriage that was to last for 70 years. Tamar's Hebrew served as an, alas, unattainable model to many of us. Oh, to be able to produce a voiced, uvular, fricative R like Tamar did. Tamar was a people person. Rabbi Weisberg and Tamar expanded their dining room and installed in it a long, long table at which they could celebrate Shabbat dinner with their terrific growing family. Even when she was ill, Tamar enjoyed being with people. I remember a simple Torah celebration at Ezra Havanim, now Central Jewish Congregation. The congregants stood in two rows facing each other and clapped to the music. Zara, Tamar's caretaker, pushed her between the rows, and Tamar beamed with delight. I would go up to Tamar after a Shabbat morning service to wish her Shabbat Shalom. Zara would say to Tamar, "Look who's here, your best friend." Although by this time, I don't think that Tamar recognized who I was. She would give me a welcoming smile that made me feel good, made me feel happy. Tamar was very smart. Although she had a family to take care of and responsibilities at Temple Bethel, she became an honor student at Mundelein College and earned her bachelor's degree. Our oldest daughter, Pauline, had Tamar as a teacher in a Hebrew class at Temple Bethel. And Pauline says, I'm quoting my daughter here, Tamar was very capable enough to get a class of young adolescents to really learn Hebrew. Last, Tamar was helpful. When I was studying for my adult mitzvah at Temple Bethel, my teacher suddenly disappeared, shall we say. I was lucky in that he was replaced by Tamar, who was an excellent, encouraging educator. Often, when I'm reading a prayer in Hebrew, I acknowledge that I am able to do this thanks to Tamar. Our youngest daughter, Shira, had the last bat mitzvah at Temple Bethel on Tuesday. By this time, services were going back and forth between Thule and Northbrook. The week of Shira's bat mitzvah, on Friday night, they left the prayer books back in Northbrook. Who retrieved them on Shabbat morning? Of course, it was Tamar. Tamar was pretty, and she spoke fantastic Hebrew. She was friendly, capable, and helpful. She had Allah malas. She will be missed, and what she taught won't be forgotten.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Elech. Elech. So said Rebecca in Torah, when asked if she would leave home for a new land and a husband. One word, Elech. I will go. It was a response that really revealed Rebecca's confidence and her faith in the future. And it was a decision by Rebecca that would ultimately establish that strong woman as a leader, thrusting her into the role not only as wife of a patriarch, but as a powerful, consequential matriarch herself. Rivka was a leader, a shaper of events. Those elements of Rebecca's story abide in the life of Tamar Weissberg as well. Tamar was also a partner and a leader, strong and sensitive and generous, tender and tough. As we heard, she came from strong parents, Michael or Michael, the shomer, protector of that kibbutz, with rifle on horseback and so forth. And we learned that when he was injured, wounded, this young woman, Leah, nursed him to health. And one sees those qualities as well, both those qualities, nurturing, action, strength in Tamar. Some of this early material has been covered so well by others, but I just want to say one vignette, little vignette that Rabbi Weissberg told me a couple of days ago, that after the tragedy with Moshe and Leah, their mother said to brother Ephraim, Tamar's older brother Ephraim, she said, "You can either become a beggar or go to Hebrew University." That's tough love. Ephraim chose option 2, and that's how both sisters, Tamar and Batami, went to Jerusalem during that very fretful time. And a couple of years later, when a young rabbinical student, more on him soon, inquired about the damaged plaster in Tamar's room in their apartment on King George, in her apartment on King George, Tamar answered simply shrapnel. And so for sure, Tamar's innate fortitude, part of her family just within her, was forged into even stronger stuff by these early experiences. As was mentioned, she was given quite a bit of responsibility as a very young woman in the Jerusalem police force, and some nights she would actually get a ride home from the station in David Ben-Gurion's own car. But as they said, the old man, Hazakain, as they called the diminutive Ben Gurion, was never in the car, but at least Tamar got to ride inside of it. But meanwhile, Haish Hatzair, the young man that I mentioned before, was among some American rabbinical students around that time studying for a year at Hebrew University, 1950-1951. And they all seemed to be kind of arrayed also on King George Street. One student, Freddie Schwartz, and happy to have Roberta Schwartz here this afternoon, made a connection somehow between Tamar and this young rabbinical student. Enter Victor Weissberg. And they went out. It was a date, and the date worked. They got to know each other. Victor would sometimes meet Tamar at the police station, and they would walk home together. And she, just like Rebecca's generosity in Torah, would give something, however modest, to anyone in need on the streets. And this impressed her suitor. They were in love. They married. The not yet Rabbi Weisberg suggested that maybe they would live on a kibbutz, but Tamar, with wisdom and foresight, really a very young woman, said no, rather, Elech, I will go. I will go with you. And so they went, moving to Cincinnati for his final year at Hebrew Union College, and then eventually going to Hyde Park. I believe it was Hyde Park for a year or so. During this time, for this young couple, finances were lean, but over a few years, the family became robust, and Mishpachat Weisberg grew to include Amira, Ariel, Alona. 3 A's, like a triple A rating, shows a lot of confidence in the future. Indeed, the future came a knocking when Temple Beth El hired Rabbi Weisberg, and the Weisbergs were for more than 4 decades the face of that still illustrious congregation. I did not know that your mom did not like the title Rebbitzin, but her life was rich as Rebbitzin, but in other ways too. The family thrived within the home that Ariel described so beautifully, and Order 2, still a hub of that dynamic clan, more than 30 of them spread over 4 generations, and it started way back when. There was, you can imagine it, in that home, play, spirited arguments, and yes, there were Ima's rules, as you described. One that you didn't mention, that Rabbi Weisberg mentioned to me the other day, which I love. Hold your head up, and do not do anything that would make you hang your head in shame. You are a Weisberg. They also were partners in so many ways. They would consult with each other in these investments that you talked about little by little from the beginning. A stock here, a stock there, the ancient coins, and a couple of you mentioned the checkbook. I have to say one other thing about that checkbook, like Rabbi Weisberg. This is how Rabbi Weisberg got out very early of having to balance the family checkbook, by rounding up if it was $1.51 to $2, by rounding down if it was $1.49 to $1, and as you described it, Rabbi Weisberg, when Tamar figured this out, she grabbed the checkbook and said, "Give me that," and that was that. I'm sure that Alona, financial planner, you take after your mother in this regard and not your father. I hope. Regardless, as Rabbi Weisberg said, we were really a family. Conveying Jewish tradition, providing a substantive Jewish education was really a mission for Tamar Weisberg. She was the education director also at Temple Beth Or, and then when that opportunity arose, became, as was mentioned, the beloved, esteemed school director at Temple Beth El. And I think that's the time when that Weisberg partnership really reached its ultimate fruition. They were like the original Jewish power couple, together leading this premier synagogue. Kinegdam, each one supporting the other in so many ways. Who truly, throughout this community, those who are gathered here today, and thousands upon thousands of others over the last decades, who has not marveled at how Tamar and Rabbi Weissberg supported each other? It is and has been nothing short of an inspiration. It's been an inspiration for me as a younger colleague to have observed this. It is such a blessing, I know, and in a way just sheer luck to have such a partner by your side. I'm grateful for it. One from whom to seek counsel, as you did, Rabbi Weisberg, to share ideas, one who might offer encouragement, one to read through sermon drafts for the high holidays, for instance, and to give them back with comments like, "This makes no sense." I'm referring to my sermon draft, not yours, Rabbi. My first rabbinic job before coming here was as Rabbi Hellbrown's assistant at Temple Beth Allen. As I arrived there, I met the Weisberg clan, of course. Tamar, ever the teacher, suggested very early on that she and I do a little Hebrew chavruta. To clarify, this was not to improve her Hebrew skills. And it was not really about the fricative ratios either, Elaine. It was about something somewhat more fundamental than that, I guess. But either way, I was grateful. So I'd go to that home, your home, and we'd sit at that dining room table that's been mentioned, and we would talk the rites. Potentially intimidating for me at first, perhaps a bit, but it vanished. Because Tamar was as always herself. To me, she was welcoming, gracious, fun as we sat at that table together, and I learned more Hebrew, yes, but I also learned a lot more than that. I learned about the family. I learned about generations past, generations arising. She didn't boast, really, but she had enormous pride in children, children-in-law, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so forth. Enormous pride. And she showed me photographs, like the iconic picture of her father as a young shomer, and the paintings on the wall, and the coins, and yes, we talked about investments, and she asked questions as well, eliciting from me aspects of my own life, my background. And she was patient, and she was encouraging, and she was direct as well. Sometimes she would say something like, if I stumbled in Hebrew, she would say, "No, Atayudea, you know this word." She got it out of me. And she told me about the travels, how she and Rabbi Weisberg would take walks in many countries, in Israel, around the neighborhood here, and they walked, and they talked. And that is how it all began once upon a time. On that first date, shoulder to shoulder, side by side in Jerusalem. Kinegda, Kinegdo, he leaning upon her, she upon him, for 70 years. In recent years, before the pandemic, they were regulars here at our Shabbat morning services and other times as well here at Ezra Hapanim, the Niles Catholic Jewish congregation, and they sat right back there, and I would watch them from right up here, and I would watch them during Kiddush. And Rabbi Weisberg was so solicitous of his partner, of his wife, of his love, not with any kind of conspicuous sort of display of heroism. No. You were there for her, Rabbi Weisberg, and you brought her here just because you knew how important that was for her ears to soak in the native tongue, to take it into her hearts, to feel the music, to be with her people on Shabbats. Rabbi Weisberg, you once told me, we talked about this, that she deserved all of that, your devotion. As she was devoted to you, you were no less devoted to her. And it was beautiful. Friends, Torah does not record Rebecca's death. We know where she's buried, but we know nothing of her last years, her final days or anything like that. Perhaps like Tamar's, they were full of challenges, maybe similar challenges. It's interesting to think about that. Ironic for women so smart, perhaps. But greater, much greater and much more important than the challenges at the end were her blessings from the start and throughout. Brachot Rabos. Blessings abundant. The blessing of building our homeland, the blessing of leading our community, the blessing of teaching us, the blessing of creating and nurturing and loving and being loved without measure in return. O Sa'ela lo timot la'olam, she who lives in this way shall never be shaken. Zichronah Livracha. May Tamar Weissberg's memory always be for blessing. Amen. Leidati Reshit, Uftirat Hachlit Hachayim Masahim, Kahalichat Smicha, V'Shalav V'Shalav. Birth is a beginning, death a destination, life a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage. And that long and truly beautiful, inspiring life journey of Tamar Weissberg has now reached its conclusion. Into your care, O God, we entrust the spirit of Tamar Weissberg. For you keep faith with your children in death as in life. Sustain all of us, O God, that we may meet with serenity the mysteries that lie ahead for us, so that when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you, O God, will be with us, a loving friend in whom we put our trust. You are the light of our lives, our hope in eternity. Please rise for the El Malay welcome. El Malay Rachamim, Shochenim Vamromim, Amitzei Menucha Nekona, Tachat Kanfei Hashkinah, Im Kedoshim Tehorim, Tezohar Hakim Asirim, Et Nishmat, Tamar Bat Nechaya B'Leah, Shachar La'olamah, Harachamim Nasireha, Beseter Knafav La'olamim, V'yitzor V'tzor HaChaim Et Nishmatah, Adonai V'nachalata, V'tanua V'shalom, Amishkava, V'namah. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence with the holy and the pure who glow like the light of the heavens to Tamar Weissberg, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence and within the shadow of your wings. Let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. And we say, Amen. You may be seated.
The interment's going to take place at Shalom Memorial Park, located in Arlington Heights, Illinois. For safety reasons, the family is going to request that people just go on their own, and we will reconvene at the cemetery at about 3:30. It's 2:22 right now. We have maps with directions how to get to the cemetery if you're not familiar with this. On conclusion of the interment, the family will be coming back here to Ezra Habanim, Niles Township Jewish Congregation. They'll be receiving family and friends tonight from 5 to 9 p.m. And then starting tomorrow, Shiva will be at Ariel and Kava Weisberg's residence. That information is in the service pamphlets that we've handed out. Following have been asked to act as pallbearers to the grandchildren, and that is Orly Henry, Talia Black, Dr. Micah Sussman, Esther Sussman, Elon Weissberg, Danielle Weisberg, and Ronit Natate. At this time, if everybody would please rise, could I have the pallbearers come over to the support of the casket and be escorted to the casket from the sanctuary.
The voice says, cry out. I say, what shall I cry? All flesh is grass, all its beauty like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades, when a wind of the eternal blows upon it. Surely the people are grass, the grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God shall endure forever.
Go ahead and use the washroom right now, the limousines, everything else.
And wait for us to make the turn at the bottom, okay? And we will meet you right down there.
I just think of the comments about your shirt.
Esther does.